The room fell silent so suddenly that even the ticking clock seemed too loud. 3 armed bodyguards stood frozen near the marble fireplace. A nervous housemaid pressed both hands against her apron, her face drained of color. And in the center of the luxurious mansion, little Maribel, barely 4 years old, stood with her tiny hands clenched at her sides, staring directly into the eyes of the most feared men in the city. Rocco Varela. A man whose name made powerful businessmen lower their voices. A man who had never apologized to anyone in his life. But Maribel did not know who Rocco Varela was. She only knew that her mommy was crying. And with tears shining in her own eyes, the little girl looked up at the dangerous man and said, "Say sorry to my mommy." Then everyone went silent. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one small act to change a life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know how far this story has reached. Maribel's mother, Celeste, had worked in the Varela mansion for nearly 3 years. She was quiet, hardworking, and invisible in the way people like Rocco preferred their employees to be. Every morning before sunrise, Celeste left the tiny apartment she shared with her daughter and took 2 buses across the city. She cleaned floors that shone like mirrors, arranged expensive flowers that cost more than her monthly rent, and served meals to people who barely remembered her name. But Celeste endured it all for Maribel. Her little girl was the reason she worked until her hands ached and her feet burned. Maribel dreamed of having a room filled with books, a pink bicycle, and someday becoming a teacher. Celeste promised herself that no matter how difficult life became, her daughter would never grow up believing that poverty meant she deserved less love or less dignity. That morning, however, everything had gone wrong. Rocco had returned from a tense meeting already furious. A business deal had collapsed, someone had betrayed him, and for the first time in years, he had lost control of something important. When he entered the mansion, he noticed a glass of wine spilled across an expensive antique rug. Celeste had been the one carrying the tray. She had stumbled when one of the guards rushed past her. The accident had taken less than a second. But Rocco's anger had exploded. In front of the entire staff, he accused Celeste of carelessness. His voice was cold and sharp, each word cutting deeper than the last. Celeste tried to explain, but fear tightened her throat. She apologized again and again, not because she believed she deserved the humiliation, but because she was terrified of losing her job. Then Rocco said something that broke her. He told her that people like her were lucky to work under his roof and should remember their place. Celeste lowered her head. She did not want anyone to see her cry. But Maribel saw. The little girl had been sitting quietly in the kitchen because Celeste had no one to watch her that day. She had heard her mother's voice shaking. She had watched the tears fall. And something inside her small heart refused to accept it. While every adult in the room remained afraid, Maribel walked forward. One of the bodyguards moved to stop her, but Rocco lifted his hand. Perhaps he expected the child to be frightened by him. Perhaps he thought she would run back to her mother. Instead, she planted herself directly in front of him. Her voice trembled, but she did not step back. "Say sorry to my mommy." No one breathed. Celeste immediately rushed forward, horrified. She begged Maribel to stop, apologizing to Rocco for her daughter's behavior. But Maribel turned toward her mother with confusion in her eyes. She could not understand why her mother was apologizing when she was the one who had been hurt. And that simple confusion struck Rocco harder than any threat ever could. For decades, he had built his life around fear. He believed respect came from power, and power came from making sure nobody ever dared to challenge him. Yet there stood a 4-year-old child with nothing except courage and love for her mother. Rocco looked at Celeste. For the first time, he truly saw her. He noticed the exhaustion beneath her eyes. The small cracks in her hands. The way she instinctively pulled Maribel close, as though the entire world was dangerous and she had to protect her daughter from it. And suddenly, a memory returned to him. He was 6 years old again, hiding behind a doorway as his own mother was shouted at by a wealthy man she worked for. He remembered wanting to defend her. He remembered being too afraid. His mother had gone home that night with tears in her eyes and had told him that one day, when he became a man, he should never let the world turn his heart into stone. But somewhere along the way, Rocco had done exactly that. His jaw tightened. The guards exchanged uneasy looks. Then the impossible happened. Rocco Varela lowered himself to one knee. He looked Celeste directly in the eyes and apologized. Not a cold apology. Not something forced for appearances. He admitted that his anger was not her fault and that no one deserved to be humiliated because another person had a bad day. The room remained silent because nobody there had ever heard Rocco speak with regret. Celeste could barely respond. But Maribel studied him carefully. Then, with the seriousness only a child could possess, she asked if he meant it. A few nervous people almost smiled. Rocco did not. He simply nodded. I mean it, he told her. Maribel stared at him for another moment before reaching out her tiny hand. Rocco looked at it, confused. The little girl said that when someone was sorry, they had to do better. That sentence changed something inside him. Over the following weeks, the mansion began to change in small but meaningful ways. Rocco raised the wages of every household employee. He created proper working hours and made sure no one was punished for accidents. But the greatest change was in himself. He started listening. Celeste expected him to fire her eventually, but instead, Rocco asked about Maribel. He learned that the little girl loved books, so he had shelves built in a sunny corner of the house just for her whenever she visited. He even discovered that Celeste had once dreamed of becoming a nurse before life forced her to leave school. Quietly, without demanding gratitude, Rocco arranged for her to continue her education. Months later, Celeste stood outside a nursing school holding her acceptance letter. Tears rolled down her cheeks as Maribel jumped around her, laughing and shouting that her mommy was going to help people. Rocco watched from a distance. For years, people had feared him. But that day, for the first time in a long time, he felt something far more valuable than fear. He felt peace. As Maribel ran toward him, she suddenly stopped and looked up with a mischievous smile. She asked if he remembered his promise to do better. Rocco smiled. I remember, he said. And he did. Because sometimes, the strongest person in the room is not the one surrounded by bodyguards, money, or power. Sometimes, it is a tiny child who simply refuses to let someone she loves be treated without kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so more people can discover stories that remind us of compassion, courage, and second chances. Before the story ends, leave a red heart in the comments if you believe one act of kindness can change even the hardest heart. And as Celeste and Maribel walked toward their new future, Rocco Varela stood quietly behind them, finally understanding the lesson a 4-year-old had taught him: no matter how powerful you become, saying sorry does not make you weak. Sometimes, it is the first step toward becoming the person you were always meant to be.